I wanted to bring today's episode to the podcast talking about the biology of trauma. Many times when we receive a fertility diagnosis, that in itself can be very traumatic. And so we talk about what happens when we have a life plan of things are going a certain way, we're going to build our family a certain way, and that's changed. And so a traumatic diagnosis like this, how that impacts your body, how you can then actually move that stored trauma out of your body. We go through some simple exercises in this podcast where you can start right now. And then also we talk about the biology of trauma. So from a biochemistry standpoint, which in conventional medicine, no one's even talking about. So excited for you to listen to this episode of how to move stored trauma out of your body, recognize that it's there in the first place, and get yourself into that receiving state instead of stuck up in the fight or flight where our body is all stressed. How do we come into the receiving state and really just, grant ourselves some grace? So excited for you to listen to today's episode. Let's go. Hey there, I'm Sarah Clark, founder of Fab Fertile and your host. I believe the functional approach is the first step for anyone struggling with infertility, and my aim is to help you get pregnant naturally. Today, I'm welcoming Dr. Amy Epigan to the podcast, and we're digging into how the biology of trauma impacts the fertility journey. Dr. Amy is double board certified medical physician in both preventative and addiction medicine and holds double master's degrees in biology and in public health. She's a leading medical expert on the addressing stored trauma in the body through her signature model and methodology, the biology of trauma, a new lens that courageously uplevels the old methods of trauma work and medicine by reverse engineering trauma's effects on the nervous system and body on a cellular level. Dr. Amy specializes in trauma, attachment, and addictions after having personal experience in foster parenting, adopting, and then having her own health issues that were the result of childhood and life experiences. In addition to her medical studies that have included functional medicine certification, she has also sought out trauma therapy training since 2015. Thanks so much for listening. I'm so thankful that you're here. Make sure you hit subscribe or follow. And if you know someone else who is on the fertility journey, please share this podcast with them. Hey, Dr. Amy, excited to have you on the podcast.
Likewise, Sarah. It's really good to be here.
Awesome. Great. So if you can really share your journey and how you came to do this work. Most people have a journey of how they found the functional approach.
Yeah. My journey is probably like many others, where it was both the combination of my own health crash and needing to figure out what was wrong and not being able to figure that out with the conventional approach. But of course, right, like Sarah, I was trained in the conventional approach. So I was the conventional approach until I had my own health crash that, again, was kind of like those, not sure what's exactly wrong. Labs seem mostly normal, some things that we can fix, but even when we're addressing those, it's like things are not going as expected. So we don't know. And I guess maybe this is just your new normal. And I was like, no, this is not going to be my new normal at all. And one of the things that had happened, one of the earlier life experiences that I had that really shaped that for me was having adopted my son from the foster care system. And so it had introduced me to this idea of trauma. And I knew enough to know that my specific symptoms were actually all very closely correlated with adverse childhood experiences study, the ACE study. And I didn't understand why. And so thankfully, because of that, it already kind of had framed my mind to start asking questions and be like, wait a second, I think that there's something deeper here. And let me go on a journey to figure out what's going on in my body and how to fix it. And for me, it really came down to that combination of functional medicine and trauma work. And I'll just kind of leave it at that. Trauma work, different than most people understand trauma work, what I've landed on. But that was an essential piece for me to get better.
Yeah. And I think many people, obviously on the fertility journey, I know when I was diagnosed with premature ovarian insufficiency at 28, I'd framed it in my mind that actually other people that were going through IVF and had to go through years of treatment and cycles, because I could go right to donor eggs, I actually had it easier than other people. I totally reframed everything in my head. I didn't even cry about the diagnosis when I was given it at 28. Obviously, it's shocking. I went into like action mode. I was probably more like angry is kind of where my default rather than crying. That's kind of what I still do today, to this day. But obviously underneath all of that, like that's a very, traumatic diagnosis at 28 when you're like, I'm just getting ready to have my kids. My little life plan just got completely diverted. So, yeah, so being on the fertility journey, obviously, so how do we, well, first of all, how do we recognize it's traumatic? Like, yeah, what's your definition there of trauma? Because I didn't really think it was. Looking back, I know it was now, but what's your take on that piece?
Yeah. And it's really helpful to have a simple definition of trauma so that we can look back at certain moments in our life and be like, oh, yeah, that was actually traumatic. So, trauma does have lasting consequences on our biology as opposed to just something that's stressful. So, we do want to understand the difference. And trauma is anything that, for any reason, at that time overwhelmed us. And we can feel it as a shock. We can feel it as something that takes our breath away, that kick in the gut. And we feel our body like not bouncing back. It's not like, oh, okay, and let me just address the problem and move forward with action. It's that moment where you feel defeated. You feel like something so big has just crushed you, crumbled you. That is a moment when trauma has happened. And when we look at it through that lens, everyone, right? Like everyone really has had trauma. Saying that especially for you, right? Like that diagnosis and that news at that age, wow, what a blow. What a blow. And being able to recognize the effect that that had on you at that time. And then we can talk about, right, like all of the biology pieces, but just in that moment of time, being able to come back and recognize that that moment was a moment where, yeah, I had that shock. I had that hit to my system. And that's a common thing when people get a diagnosis like infertility or anywhere along that spectrum where it's like, no, this is not how my life was going to go. This was not part of my plan. This was not part of the plan. And it what often makes it a trauma is that it hits us at a core where it's like we have, I'm not necessarily sure that I want to say that we had put our worth in our plan, but something where it questions our ability to be enough. Like, am I good enough if I can't have children? And it brings up some very deep core questions. And that right there, actually, Sarah, is one of the patterns that we can see that actually stored trauma was already in there in your system, that was its immediate reaction.
Yeah, and it caused me to do this because I've worked a lot through this, so it's not as bad as it was, but still in times of stress, I can find myself going into that controlling, over planning mode. So I
Yep.
remember when I got the diagnosis, and many people that we work with, it's the same thing where you have the diagnosis, if it doesn't work, if I was going to try, the donor egg route with this clinic. If that didn't work, I was going to go to the US. If that didn't work, I was going to go somewhere else. I was going to adopt. I was going to get a surrogate. I was going to quit my job and travel around the world and a lot of this piece is like trying to guard ourselves from actually feeling like the pain of this. And the only time actually during this, when I was diagnosed, that I cried was I said to my husband, I'm like, I want to get a dog. And he's like, I don't want a dog. And I'm like, I want to get a dog. And I'm lying on the bed, just like sobbing because he's like, didn't want this dog. And we eventually got the dog, but yeah, it came out differently for me. Whereas, it's a different experience for everyone.
Yeah. And you bring up a really good point because the body will naturally do things in order to not feel uncomfortable, right? In the trauma world, we call that dysregulation. And it's unsustainable. And so the brain, the nervous system, everything will reach for something that will bring down the intensity of those uncomfortable feelings. And so many people move into a kind of, I just need to take action, and it's going to become something that looks a bit controlling, looks a bit controlling because it actually has come down to something of survival now, where it's not something where it's just, it would be nice. Well, this is a different plan. This is a different path in life. No, like it has touched on something so deep in us that it has become something of survival, that we start doing things that look irrational to other people.
And so how does trauma get stored in the body at a cellular level? We've heard that phrase before, but what does that mean?
Yeah. So actually, trauma is not in the event itself at all. And we see this because people can go through the same event. And for some people, it ends up being a stress where their body bounces back to what we call homeostasis, and other people's body does not. And for them, that's because it was a trauma. And it is in the nervous system and that reaction of our nervous system that either makes it a trauma or not. And so I talk about there being 3 states of the nervous system. And this is where trauma gets stored. And so we have the parasympathetic state, which is many people might recognize that as the social engagement state, the rest and digest. There's a couple different words that have been used to describe that state, which is where truly you are going to be in your best health and you are going to be your best self. But then we have these 2 other states, and they are not bad. I really want to make sure that there's no judgment or shame here. We've had enough of that in our lifetime, right? we don't need more judgment and shame. But when we experience a stress and then a trauma, there's actually a very predictable neurobiological sequence that happens, that if it does not complete that cycle, Sarah, trauma gets stored in the nervous system. And so the response is always, there's a potential danger, there's a threat, and there's a startle, and we can feel ourselves have that startle response, and we go into sympathetic. It's a high energy state, and then we generally will move into some form of action. So, if say you're on a bike and you see a dog out, you're going to have that startle of, is the dog going to chase me? Right? If the dog starts chasing you, you are going to move to action, right? There's going to be now this full on high energy. I am using my muscles. I am breathing fast. My heart is racing. There's all of these elements that go into that sympathetic state. And then what happens is that at the moment that something becomes overwhelming, and I've used the example of a dog because it's easy to think of that, but again, there are many situations in life that are also emotional that overwhelm us, that are not necessarily an event like a dog chasing us, but it's an email, it's a phone call, it's a diagnosis. And in that moment, what happens is that our system is so overwhelmed with the intensity of the emotion, and it doesn't have a plan for action in the moment, or it feels like what just happened is so big, or it happened so fast that there's not time to respond. And in those cases, the system will go into that 3rd state of the nervous system, which is the freeze response. And the freeze response is where you literally feel like your breath has been taken away from you. Like you have that gasp and you kind of stop breathing for a good minute. And sometimes you even need that reminder from someone else, like, hey, can you take a breath? You're not breathing. And you're like, oh, that's right, I'm supposed to be breathing. Because it just is it's the natural thing that the body, specifically the nervous system, does in that moment to survive something, usually a felt body sensation that feels overwhelming. And so it goes into this freeze response. And this is where, just as a society, we haven't been taught to know what to do when we go into the freeze response. And so we don't complete it. And so it gets stored. And when I say it gets stored, what happens is that in that startle response and in that high sympathetic, that high fear or that high insecurity, that high anxiety, there's a lot of adrenaline that gets released with that. And if that adrenaline is not able to be released and be turned into action, and instead we are immobilized, immobilized with fear, in a moment of time, in a second of time, our brainstem switches in that vagus nerve to communicating what is called through the dorsal vagal nucleus, or many people might know the polyvagal theory that Dr. Stephen Porges has brought to the world. And this is the freeze response. And it happens in a moment of time where the nervous system says, whoa, that is such high intensity state. That is unsustainable. And we need to shut things down immediately in order to survive this. But for us, emotionally, it feels like a collapse. It feels like we've just been crushed by something. That's what we will experience on an energy level. And in that moment of time, unless we can sit there and tolerate that and let it pass through our system, and then we usually come out of it, and there would normally be some kind of shaking, there would be maybe some tears, there'd be what we call a discharge. All of that actually gets stored and stuck in the nervous system. And so it starts to accumulate burden. It starts to accumulate trauma. It starts to accumulate these life experiences that we have not allowed our body to complete that full cycle and come out of that freeze response. And so what happens as the downstream result of that is that with more and more events, with more and more time just going through life, smaller things start to overwhelm us faster. And what we used to be able to tolerate, now we just immediately reach for coping mechanisms. Now we just immediately reach for the chocolate, the food, the snack. We immediately reach for the TV and turn on a movie just to kind of avoid the what has started to feel like numbness. And that's what people describe when they are in that freeze response. It feels like they're just a little numb to life. There's no joy. They've lost their joy. They've lost the feeling of being alive. They're just kind of going through the motions. And so even though a person can have a very OCD controlling type of plan, even with that, they can feel like they're just kind of going through the motions, and they've got their plan and they're doing it. But the other thing that can happen, Sarah, is that they feel that heaviness underneath it all, and they're trying to stay out of that freeze response. And so they drive themselves on adrenaline every day. And when they let themselves stop and just stop, and they actually feel what is underneath all of that, then the heaviness comes. And so that's how we can see evidence of, hey, like you've got stored trauma, and that stored trauma is all in the nervous system, and the autonomic nervous system specifically, not necessarily in the central nervous system in the brain, but actually in the autonomic nervous system that controls our health.
I guess it's interesting with animals. Well, they'll the Taylor Swift song, like shake it off. So the dogs will just like shake it off. My dog
Yes.
had dental surgery last week, and I was horrified because they took out 15 teeth out of her little mouth, and she was supposed to only have 2 extractions. So, I think I had trauma from her bringing dental. But anyways, like, she came in and she sort of looks a little bit wobbly. But yeah, then I'll just sort of would see her later, kind of just doing these little shakes and stuff like that. Where
Exactly.
like from a physical standpoint. How do we then rewire and balance nervous system? Like what are things that we can do?
Yeah. And this is where a lot of people go wrong, because we've been told wrong. Right. And so what we've normally been told is what, like, go see a therapist. Sarah, you really need to talk to someone about this. Right. And yet what did your dog do? Did your dog talk about it? No, no. Now, thankfully, right, like this is stuff that is wired naturally into us. So if we actually had the awareness of the impulses of our body, we would actually normally naturally do a lot of these things as well. And you'll see kids and babies doing this kind of stuff. But then somehow once you reach a certain age, it becomes socially unacceptable to allow yourself to process something, right? We're told to, hey, move on. You got stuff to do. That's in the past. You're here. You got to be looking for the future. You got to have your mindset, fix your mindset, say some affirmations, be grateful. All of these things that are all focused on changing the brain, but it's not actually touching the body where trauma has been stored. So I have done everything wrong myself. So there is no judgment or no shame to what many people think is the right thing to do, and what would be helpful to do, but it actually brings things up without being able to resolve them. And so it's almost re-traumatizing, and it actually can keep the nervous system stuck in survival mode on a cellular level because of that. So what I have done is I've kind of integrated all of the different trainings and backgrounds and my own experiences, both with my son and now with myself now, and designed what I call like the essential sequence. And the essential sequence starts with actually having to create a different experience for our body, which is one of safety. And many, many people say, after going through my 21-day journey program, which is a 21-day journey into their nervous system, and they say, I have never actually felt safe in my body. I wouldn't have even known what that was. I didn't know the degree to which I didn't feel safe in my body until actually going through these exercises. But I've never felt truly safe in my body in the world. There's always been this element of guard yourself, brace yourself. It's be watching for the next shoe to drop, and to actually be able to now create moments of time. And then we build on that until it's the majority of the time. But we have to start with just a moment in time, and teaching people somatic skills, somatic work, a somatic practice that they can do that works directly with their autonomic nervous system and actually gives them a felt sense of safety. And when they accomplish that, and these exercises are very simple, very short, and so often we will see a shift in just 2 minutes of them doing this exercise, or one of the many exercises. And what you'll see is you'll see their shoulders drop, and they don't even maybe notice or feel that their shoulders are dropping. And you'll notice that they will have a deep spontaneous breath. They are not controlling their breath. This is different than breath work. We actually use the breath to measure and track the nervous system, and is it shifting to a felt sense of safety in that parasympathetic state. And so we're able to track it with the breath. We're able to track it with yawns. We're able to track it with body sensations. People will describe, oh, I did that exercise, or I did this movement, and my chest feels like it has this expansion. My chest feels like it can breathe now. And it's like, wonderful. What a nice feeling that must be, to feel like you have your breath, that you can breathe. Many people will experience a softening in their belly, and they haven't realized how much tension they hold in their belly. Yeah, a lot of trauma gets stored in the belly, in the pelvis, because that's where the vagus nerve goes. It runs our digestive system. And so when it triggers this communication to go into the collapse and the freeze response in this overwhelm state, it shuts things down. And so to feel that starting to soften, starting to open up, we have to do things very gently, of course, because even something good that's done too much too fast will put it right back into overwhelm. But it's a gentle process of working directly with the nervous system, first in creating a felt sense of safety. And then step 2 is creating a felt sense of support. And we cannot accept support until we feel safe. So that's why we really do have to start with creating for ourselves, not relying on someone else, but actually having the tools to create for ourselves a felt sense of safety in this moment in time. We don't need to go into the story. We don't need to go into the past. It's just this moment in time right here, and actually feeling, what does it feel like to feel safe in your body? Not what does it, feel like to think the thoughts and tell yourself that you feel safe. No, like actually feel safe in your body. And then we can bring on that next element of support. And for most people, right, most people have a degree of insecure attachment style. And so in their very nervous system, from before they even had words and could speak, they had threads of insecurity that were being wired into their nervous system as it was developing. And this is how it's been then since the beginning of time for them, for decades. And when we bring in support, it starts to touch on those elements of attachment that are wired in, because how attachment was formed was through these different areas and ways of providing support from our caregivers. And so there's specific areas in the body where the nervous system responds so well to touch and containment and support that allows those attachment patterns, those insecure attachment patterns, to start to open up, to start to be willing to feel safe, and to be willing to consider that we can feel supported, that we can that we don't have to be doing it all by ourselves, or feel all alone in the world, or feel like no one understands us. And that allows for some of this connection to start to open up. And then after that, we can go to joy and growth expansion. But many people try to go to the joy first, and they just are like, I've lost my joy. Let me go to joy. And it's like, you can't. The nervous system can't do that until it's laid this foundation first of feeling safe, then supported, and then we can move into joy and not have it actually create further disconnect between our mind and our body. I feel like I've just thrown a lot at you, Sarah.
No, it's all good. It's interesting. I have sort of when tension or stress kind of hits me, it goes to the jaw.
Yes,
goes to the
jaw.
stomach, where I'm like, why am I trying to always keep my stomach like?
Oh, can I do an exercise with you right now?
Yeah, I was going to ask you to do one. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. And because you mentioned the jaw, I'm going to go to one specific exercise that I normally don't start people on, but I'm going to go there with you if that's okay. All right. Do you, I am assuming that you have never been introduced to the sound VU.
No.
Okay. So this is all new to you. So we're going to start with making the sound VU, and then we're going to do something else. And so that's it. We're going to take a deep breath in together, and then we're going to have the sound come from our belly, not from our chest, not from our throat, but from our belly. And we're just going to say VU until all of our breath is gone. And then we're just going to pause and see what happens. All right. So let's take a deep breath in. I'll do it with you, and I'll kind of start just so you can see what it is. Take a deep breath in as full as you can. Voo. And then just pause. Just pause. I'm noticing my shoulders feeling more settled. They're feeling like they have more weight to them. It's a nice sensation. And there's a deep breath for me, a spontaneous deep breath. So that's a sign for me that helped my system. What are you noticing in your body? Nose running.
My nose running. Yeah, that's always good.
Yeah, that's actually not uncommon. Mm-hmm.
Oh, is it? Okay.
The eyes can water, the nose can run. Mm-hmm. That's a nice parasympathetic shift.
Yeah, the shoulders, and then the jaw just felt a little.
Yep.
Like when I in university, my jaw was like so tight. I remember I couldn't even like put not that eating fries was a good idea. I had like a major gluten sensitivity, but having a fry back then, I couldn't even get it in my mouth. And for years that went on. And then, I've since done some work. So now when I find myself, but I could feel it. I could just feel it just releasing.
Okay. Well, then we're going to do something else now. We're going to take it to the next level, and we're going to bring in some jaw movement. So just copy what I do. And as we do this again, we're going to just start with the regular VU that we just did. As much as possible, Sarah, make sure that the sound is coming from your belly. So I even often put my hands on my belly and my lower belly, like underneath my belly button, to remind myself, like, this is where the sound is coming from. So we're going to start the same, and then I'm going to bring in some jaw stuff, and you just get to copy me. All right. All right. So deep breath in as full as you can. It's silly. It's weird. And we're just going to notice. I'm going to be quiet so you can just pay attention to your body and notice any shifts. My stomach just gurgled. My digestive system is waking up with that.
I just noticed an overall body just relaxing.
Yeah. Where do you feel it relaxing?
it went from like, it went all down from the shoulders, like right down the body. Like literally felt it.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
This is what happens. These are very normal responses of your body to these exercises. It's pretty cool.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to do one more, and I'm
Mm-hmm.
going to bring in something else. We're going to take this to the highest level, Sarah.
Okay.
All right. As long as you're doing good, then then I'll keep going. All right. So we're going to start the same way. Take as deep of a breath as you can in. Have the sound come from your belly. We'll start with the regular voo. We'll bring in the jaw again. And it's really just like you're growling, right? Like just like you were a lion or a tiger. You're literally just growling. And then I'll bring in something else. Okay. All right. Deep breath in.
For anyone that can't see us, we are clawing at the screen.
Yep, we were doing our tiger and lion clawing. Mm-hmm. Oh, and there's a deep breath for me. Mm-hmm. Spontaneous deep breath. That's how I track my nervous system. What are you noticing?
Yeah, the stomach again, because I think the stomach for me is probably always constantly, contracted, and then I just sort of felt it kind of pop out again.
Awesome! Wow. So you even got some softening in your stomach.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. What are some words that you would describe how your belly feels?
Yeah, it's just rounded, and it's just
Round, yeah.
Looser and
Loose.
And yeah, feels just better, not
better.
Yeah, because sometimes you just don't even know that
You
it's
don't even
there, right?
know. You
Mhm.
don't even know. And
Mhm.
that's like so much of what I would love to share with your audience, right? Like we have no idea how much stuff we carry every day in our body because we've just gotten used to it. This is our normal. We don't realize how much of a burden we carry around every day until we stop and do some of these exercises. It's like, oh, I didn't even realize that my belly was that tight until it started to loosen up. I didn't realize that my chest felt so tight until I felt it loosen up. I didn't know that my shoulders were high until I felt them drop. Isn't that interesting?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But yeah, very simple exercises like that. That's a favorite, again, weird, very weird, but yet taps into something very instinctual in our autonomic nervous system that has profound effects on our felt sense of safety and settling right now. I feel more present with you right now. It's
Mm-hmm.
quite interesting.
Yeah, it is. I've done some what is it? Havening, which was interesting, kind of like the brushing of the skin. I've done a podcast episode on that.
Yeah.
And obviously like the belly breathing and deep breathing and meditation and all this sort of stuff. And yeah, this also is, it seems silly, right? Like when you're doing it, you're like, are you kidding me? I'm like a little tiger. but yeah, these and it's quick, and you can add that in. So when are you saying for people just to put it into like a practice of stuff like that, or what does that look like?
Yes. So, and this is why we laugh a lot in my 21-day journey, right? Like, yes, you would think that trauma is this heavy topic. We laugh so much at ourselves in this 21-day journey at some of these things that we're doing. It's fun. It's fun. And it also is really helpful that we didn't have to talk about anything, right? Like we didn't have to talk about how stressed we were. We just were able to do an exercise and like it shifted everything. I don't need to talk about it in order to shift it. So, what I encourage people to do is to start their own daily somatic practice. And so in the 21-day journey, I'm teaching them 21 different exercises like this. They're not all the VU exercise. This is only one of the 21 different exercises that I teach them that in just less than 2 minutes, they can totally shift their nervous system into feeling safe, into feeling present, into feeling supported, and what a difference that makes for them. So I'm encouraging people who are new to this to set aside time, like in the morning and in the evening, just that they don't forget it. But what I find is that the more that they do these exercises, the more that they start to use them throughout their day, because they feel they're more aware of their body, and they're like, oh, I just got really stressed about something. Oh, that's right. I have a tool now.
Yeah.
Let me do a VU. Oh, I got really angry at this person. Let me do a VU with the jaw. Rawr. and see how it shifts things. And then it brings you back into the present moment and allows you to hold more stress and be able to respond to situations rather than react and just go into that overwhelm. And I don't know what to do. I just want it to go away. I don't have the energy to deal with it. And I just want to eat a bowl of ice cream.
Stuff it all down, and yeah,
Stuff it all
exactly.
down.
Eat,
Yeah.
shop, gamble, whatever
Anything.
your vice is.
Anything.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Anything.
And so what about the biochemical imbalances? What's your take on some of those things? I know so my son, we've done a number of these pieces with mineral imbalances, and he's has some mental health issues we're working on with him, and have discovered some really stuff that I don't think anyone would even have, in the conventional side of medicine. We're like, okay, let's give medication and nothing to look at the underlying imbalances going on. So so the biochemical imbalances, what are you seeing typically?
Yeah. And let me start, Sarah, with saying that oftentimes the conversation that I start people with is, hey, trauma, this thing stored trauma in your body and your nervous system, it has had downstream consequences to your biology. And now that biology is actually what's keeping you stuck from healing. And so it's actually preventing your nervous system from rewiring, because the nervous system has to be neuroplastic in order to rewire. And what we have created for ourselves over time is what I call negative neuroplasticity, where we have embedded and even rooted in these patterns towards stress and overwhelm and coping mechanisms, so that they've just become our default and we do them without even thinking about it. And that's been neuroplasticity, right? Like that has been our nervous system adapting to those life experiences in that way. And so for us to rewire those patterns that have become ruts, I mean, they are well paved highways that are automatic in our nervous system. To change that, yeah, we need to have our nervous system optimized for positive neuroplasticity in order to change that. And so, yes, these types of techniques, some of the havening stuff, like all of these techniques are very helpful. However, we also have to address the biology that is actually keeping your nervous system stuck in survival mode on a cellular level. And when we bring those two together, the therapeutic modalities and this biology that will keep you stuck, my goodness, like magic happens. And what I see happening is that people are able to accelerate their healing journey because their nervous system has everything it needs for positive neuroplasticity. And we are creating these different experiences of safety, of support, of presence and groundedness that allows for the nervous system to be like, yep, we have a new environment now. We're actually in a safe environment now. And so we got to adapt to that. But a conversation that then I need to follow up with people on and say, you know what? It's actually not just the biology that's the downstream effect of stored trauma. There were likely biology factors that predisposed you to experiencing trauma, to your nervous system reaching a point of overwhelm sooner than what it would have if it didn't have these biochemical imbalances. So let's talk about that, because as long as you still have those for the rest of your life, you're going to continue to have a lower threshold for stress. And your system's going to have this tendency to go into overwhelm. And so we want to address and identify and address those biochemical imbalances, so that for your future, you actually are building resilience on a cellular level and don't have this predisposition to trauma.
Mm-hmm.
People talk about a predisposition to diabetes, a predisposition to heart disease. And I'm telling people, you can actually have a predisposition to trauma. And we know what those are, and we can identify and address those.
Do you have any tests that you like for that? I think you have part of that was the Walsh protocol that you sort of employ some of
Yeah.
that
So,
information.
yeah, it's been fascinating, Sarah, to see how many people that have these patterns of stress and overwhelm in their system have these three specific categories of biochemical imbalances. Not to say that there aren't others, right? And I have my whole biology of trauma course that looks at all of the different types of biology that will predispose someone to trauma. But in terms of just biochemical imbalances, yes, methylation is a big one. And as a society, we have been shifting towards undermethylation, which is a feature of that is low serotonin activity, low dopamine activity, the combination of which, like, that is a perfect setup for overwhelm and trauma. And even, I'm going to say, attachment trauma, because we need serotonin and dopamine in order to have a secure attachment develop between us and our caregivers. So if we as children, as early infants, if we already had low serotonin activity and low dopamine activity because of our epigenetics and our methylation status, we are going to walk away from childhood with attachment trauma, not because our parents did anything wrong, but because we had a biochemical imbalance. We had low serotonin and low dopamine that did not allow for enough of that connection with them to form a secure attachment. And then pyroluria is another one. I am still fascinated by the number of people that, when I run these panels, are coming back high in urine cryptopyrroles, which indicates pyroluria. And the amount of oxidative stress that that causes is also a problem, because that oxidative stress builds up in our cells, builds up around our DNA, and can cause further epigenetic changes in our lifetime. So it's now not only stress and trauma. And my goodness, people with pyroluria have such a sensitive nervous system, sensitive to light, sensitive to sound, sensitive food sensitivities. They actually even have more tendency to develop an autoimmune condition because their nervous system is so sensitive and reactive. And so being able to identify that, but then also being able to address the oxidative stress that is a result of that, that we really want to do in order to avoid downstream epigenetic conditions like cancers and like some of these things that are have a strong epigenetic condition to them. Even late onset bipolar is an epigenetic trigger as a result of increased levels of oxidative stress in the cells. PTSD is a result of increased oxidative stress that then resulted in PTSD. It's not that the PTSD causes the increased oxidative stress, though it also does that. We had increased levels before, and that's what predisposed us to developing PTSD. So it's fascinating to see how much biology and biochemistry is actually predisposing us to some of these mental health conditions. And then finally, I just want to mention the copper. And certainly copper excess or zinc deficiency is also, it's like a neurotoxin to the nervous system, making it very reactive. And people can experience a lot of mood swings, but even most of postpartum depression, postpartum anxiety, over 95% of those have been found to have a copper excess. And knowing that, like, I would love to test people before they are even trying to get pregnant, so that I would imagine, and I think that many of these biochemical imbalances contribute to infertility. But even if a person does not have infertility issues and they're wanting to get pregnant, let's correct these things before you get pregnant so that we can avoid all of this stuff later on that is unnecessary if we can just identify it earlier.
Yeah, I find all of this discussion like extremely fascinating, just from a personal standpoint. With dealing with this with my son, kind of from a so he's done that how do you pronounce it, the Pyroluria
Pyroluria.
test.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, his was like through the roof.
Yep.
I couldn't get him to do any kind of blood work because he's deathly afraid of needles. That's the only thing he could do was the urine thing, and then using we use a compound pharmacy because he was deficient in zinc and his B's, and so being able to do that, and then you can kind of see him coming back to life. Like this was,
Yes.
but it'll still, especially during puberty where it kind of depleted it all. He got himself involved in a whole bunch of things. which has been a nightmare for us. So he's coming off, through the other end of it. But the food sensitivities, the sensitive child, all that kind of piece, that the biochemistry piece is fascinating, because a lot of times in the conventional side, they just want to give a medication, off you go, and there's nothing else underneath it. And we're not even addressing that piece. And then also, each child is different. Being able to deal with to be able to relate to your child and all these sort of pieces, to understand there's something else going on here, and we don't need to put all this pressure. And it's been a real. I don't talk a lot about this on the podcast because I'm helping people on the fertility journey, so I don't talk a lot about some of the struggles I'm dealing with with my kids. But with him, this has been the ultimate exercise in patience for us. Like patience, like you would not believe. Because I'm like, we are hustlers. We're gonna go go go. No, we're not. No, we're not. We're gonna quietly go along, and we're gonna look to see, and then, because a lot of this has impacted his self-esteem and things like that. So, it's still a work in progress. But to me, that there's the biochemical piece, and then being able to have those other things to help has been key. And this this is just not talked about, and people end up thinking they're an irritable, overly sensitive pain in the like whatever it is. They start labeling themselves, and there's reasons, and there's things to do that can help. And so the program that you have is like, it is so freaking unique to be able to marry these two things together, it's just amazing.
So much of what you said there, Sarah, is so important for people to hear, that I hope that landed for them. Because being able to see that, yes, like we generally experience and identify it as, oh, they're sensitive, they're emotional, they can't focus, they're they're rowdy, they're angry, they're raging. And being able to actually see beyond that and be like, wait a second, like there's this biology at play here. My summit this year is, the biology of trauma, going beyond the diagnosis, because kids get labeled and we get labeled with diagnoses. And it's not helpful, because there's biology underneath that's causing that. We think that, oh, I'm just an insecure person, or I just have relationship problems, or, whatever it is. But it's like, no, actually, this is just your nervous system. This is how it presents itself, and being able to see that your nervous system really is driving everything. It drives your health, it drives your emotions, it drives your reactions, it drives your decisions, it drives your habits and coping mechanisms. And so when we can literally look beyond everything that we do and see what's going on in the nervous system, and then it allows us to see what type of support we can give it. Because for your son, right, like his nervous system needs zinc and B's, like needs that. Otherwise, it's going to stay living in survival mode. And for other people, it might be other things. But being able to see that, wait, like the nervous system is operating in stress and survival mode because of these biochemical imbalances, or because of other biology. And there's so much that we can do, that it gives so much hope, so many more tools.
Absolutely. And then with the copper piece, we see many people being on long-term hormonal birth control, which then can elevate copper levels. We do a hair tissue mineral analysis test on this, and that was the same for me. I was put on HRT and birth control for 10 to 15 years. Copper's off the chart, wondering why I just thought I was an irritable person, just thought I was cranky. Turns out, no, I'm not. When I start to balance these things, times of stress, I will still default to the anger, crankiness, but that's not my normal. I don't have it. I used to have an issue with the front hall closet. If there were shoes stuck in the thing, I'd be taking the shoes and whipping them across the freaking house. All this. I remember wanting to whip the phone out the window, like all these kind of outbursts, which I no longer have. Not to say I'm some perfect specimen over here, but there's been a lot of work that's gone into arriving. I don't think you ever arrive, but there's things we can do, I guess, is the message.
A lot of things we can do. And many people might have had that same experience as you and been like, man, I'm an angry person. It must have had something to do with my childhood. Must be my trauma. It's time to go to a therapist and talk about it. And Not to say that that is not going to help in some areas, but there's this whole biology piece that we need to address. And until we do, we are actually creating more stress and more trauma for ourselves by the damage that we're doing to ourselves and the relationships in our life.
Absolutely. And so do you have anything you're obsessed with right now, be it a book, a website, a documentary, anything that you just want to share?
I am obsessed right now with attachment and neurodevelopment and blending all of the different models out there. And so I've got 5 different books that I'm actually in the process of creating an integrated structured framework that brings all of them together. So that is my obsession these days, because you have some phenomenal contributions from people in the field, even some of the psychology stuff like John Bowlby and Mary Ainsworth, and how they identified that we even had these attachment styles and what those attachment styles were. But then you have Dr. Alan Shore, who came along and is like, well, but it's so much of the right brain to the right brain of the child and the right brain of the mother, and that regulation piece. But then you have over here, like the CDC talking and the pediatricians talking about, well, it's about milestones and, when are they smiling? When are they crawling? When are they walking? And then you have some of the other kind of stuff around the polyvagal theory and the development of the brain and the development of the nervous system and neurobiology, and how does serotonin and dopamine play into oxytocin. And so that is my new obsession, is creating an integrated framework for all of that.
I love it. Wow. Okay. That's amazing.
It is wonderful. Yeah. I'm totally geeking out about it.
And is there a success story you'd like to share? I'm sure you have lots.
I have lots. And we actually just finished with a 21-day journey, Sarah. And so many of them are sharing just how much this has changed their life. And I want to think of Cheryl right now. So Cheryl came in, and she was one that came in because of feeling stressed and overwhelmed and just not seeing the progress that she would like to have in some of the other modalities that she had been doing. She has some health issues. A lot of it is just kind of some low grade energy problems, some digestive symptoms, but hasn't really been able to put a finger on that. But she's got a pretty rigid diet because of that. And so here she comes into the 21-day journey with all of this. And just by applying the tools and watching her progress through it, I started noticing a change just in how like her face looked different. And so like going into week 2, I'm noticing like, Cheryl, like your face, have you seen yourself in the mirror? Like you look different. And then by the 3rd week, she's showing up, and like her whole structure, her whole posture, her body looks very different. Like she's here and she's settled. She's not like here and anxious, right? Like, I've got so much to do. I've got my list of things. Like she was there and she was settled and she was present. And it was awesome to see that. And then some of the comments that she has started to share is just like, I feel like I'm thawing. I feel like there's been these areas of me that have just been frozen and been scared. And I actually am feeling those opening up. She shared that she had been avoiding phone calls with certain people. And she just felt all of a sudden that I actually want to make those phone calls. And so reached out, did some repair with some old friends and some family that they had a rupture in their relationship. And so just with the changes that she's noticing, like being able to see how this is affecting her life. But yet what we did with the exercises was just in the moment, right? Like you're going to do a VU with me. You're going to do a VU with Jaw, right? And yet the effects that this has now had on her whole nervous system and how that is leaking into and changing her life. And then the other thing that she's noticed is that she's able to focus more, and she didn't even realize that she had a focus problem, right? One of those things where I didn't notice that my shoulders were high until they dropped. And she's like, oh, now that I bring in this back support, I didn't realize that my mind and my body like weren't feeling like they were here. And so it was always kind of like, always hyper vigilant to sounds or stuff that might've been going on. But now that I'm bringing in this back support and then bringing in some stomach support too, she's like, oh my goodness, like I can read, I can write, I can do these things that just used to cost me a lot of energy to have to try to focus. And she had been reaching for coping mechanisms, right? Like the caffeine and that extra cup of coffee and these other things that she had found herself reaching for to help her focus. And she's just not even seeing the need for those anymore. So it's just stuff like this, Sarah, that just, it warms my heart to see it not only transforming her health and her life, but then, of course, the relationships in her life and the increased connection that she's experiencing with people because of this work.
Yeah, in a very short period of time.
In a very short period of time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like it really is possible to accelerate the healing journey.
Mm-hmm. And so, do you have a free download for the listeners?
Yes. Yeah, I definitely do. I actually have a guide on fertility and the freeze response.
Oh, perfect.
And so I've talked about the freeze response, this state of overwhelm, and that the body goes there, the nervous system goes there in times of overwhelm, and how that directly affects fertility, and kind of like a guide to start pulling yourself out of that freeze response. So would love to share that with your audience.
Amazing. We'll have that in the show notes so they can download. And so where can the listeners find you?
Yeah, they can find me at Trauma Healing Accelerated. And that would be a place where they can see our programs. They'll see that we have the Biology of Trauma Summit coming on August 8 to 14. And so that's a great way to also get on our newsletter and make sure that you get those updates and are able to attend that summit with all of those talks.
Awesome. And any final thoughts on our topic today, Dr. Amy?
Sarah, there's just so much hope, right? And so I just want to be able to say, yes, it can be hard to realize, oh, yeah, like I can see just because of my reactions to life, my reactions to a diagnosis, my reactions to a change in life plans and what I had anticipated, that indicates that I have some stored trauma in my nervous system. And yet it does not need to be scary to go there. It does not need to be, I don't want to say it's not work, because it is work. And sometimes it's hard work, but it doesn't need to be scary. And it's done in such a thoughtful and very structured process that it's safe, it's gentle, and it opens you up to so much. And so there really is so much hope and tools that you can apply for yourself that would love for them to start applying and seeing those changes in their life.
Awesome. Well, thanks for all the work you're doing. It's really, to me, I think it's extremely unique as to what you're offering and really giving people hope. And I like that analogy, like that heaviness where we can just lift the heaviness, go for lightness, and we can heal.
Thank you, Sarah, for the work that you do. Very important.